If you have suffered child abuse, sexual abuse, emotional, or any kind of trauma, or are interested in understanding someone who's been through that kind of abuse, then you're going to want to meet the author for today's show. We are talking with the author of The Unspoken Truth, a memoir by Lisa Zarcone. She is a child and mental health advocate and public speaker, the Massachusetts ambassador for the National Association of Adult Survivors of Child Abuse, recipient of the 2003 Women of Impact Award, Business West Magazine, 2021 Massachusetts Heroine Award recipients, and the blogger for her website, lisazarcone.net. Lisa, thank you so much for taking the time to come out and be on Triumph Talks to talk about your important book.
Yes, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you, Melanie, for having me. I'm looking forward to this, wonderful experience.
Well, I have been looking forward to bringing you on because I know how important your topic is. Unfortunately, child abuse, sexual abuse, emotional trauma um, is is so common, and there's so many people going through it or have been through it. And I had the opportunity to read your book. It's amazing. I was kind of shocked at times at what you've survived and how powerful and healthy that you are today. So let's get right into it. I want to begin with my opening question is just to ask you, why did you write this book?
That's just such a big question when I think about like why did I write this book? Because there's so many reasons behind it. First of all, my story is just such a complex story. Obviously, you read my story, you know it goes very, very deep in so many levels. But when I, started to do my own work on myself, always knew that I wanted to write my story and share it because I lived in silence for so many years. And once I broke that silence, I knew it was very important to share this story for purpose because I know there's so many people out there silently struggling right at this moment who have been through so many things that I have been through. And like you said before, child abuse, I wish I could say it was such an uncommon thing, but it is common. It's happening all over. It's happening all over the world. And the numbers are rising, and we really need to continue to talk about it. So, thinking about my story and why I wanted to share it, I wanted to help people. I wanted to give people a voice. I do call myself a voice for the voiceless because there are so many people that still have not disclosed their abuse and they live with that pain every single day. I lived with that pain for years and it really almost destroyed me. And I had to face it and I had to look at it and work through it. And that is just, the basis of why I wanted to share it. I wanted people to understand the damaged mind of a child and what they truly go through.
Well, I think that's a good opportunity for me to say to you, I think it's helpful for everyone who's watching this to fully appreciate what a voice you are for the voiceless when they can understand just how, I don't know what other word to use, but just terrible, how awful the abuse was in your life. I read your book, and there's just so many times I couldn't believe it. I was just like, I cannot believe this. And it just kept happening. And it just seemed like you were this magnet for misfortune in so many ways because your brother passed away when you were young. And that seemed to really mess up two parents who were already a mess. And I'll let you talk about that. But I think that to really appreciate your book, and what you have to teach, if you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit of your story so that people can identify with how like miraculous it is, honestly, that you're here today as with as much to share and teach as you have. I think, I'll be honest, I think most people who went through what you did probably aren't here today. I mean, it was that bad. And I know you did try to commit suicide at one point in your story, and that's something we're going to talk about because this is my introductory interview with you, and we're going to do a lot of shows going forward where we really touch on the topics of your story. But I suspect people who went through what you did probably went through with that, and you didn't. And thankfully, you're here today. So will you go ahead and share a little more about you and what happened to you?
Yes, I do want to also share that when I wrote my story, I wrote it a bit differently. I wrote
Mm.
it from a child's perspective, and that's very important to share with everyone because this is not a story of an adult looking back reflecting on the abuse. I really dug deep and went back into those old core memories and shared from the child's perspective. And my book is raw and it is profound and it is graphic at times due to the sexual abuse, the nature of what happened to me. But I felt it was very, very important to share it in such a way because I wanted people to understand truly how the child is feeling in the moment, right in the moment of abuse, and how damaging it is. So when you talk about my personal story, again, very, very complex, many things happened. I'll take you back to the beginning when I was a little girl and it was my parents. So my parents got married. They were living, the 1960s. It was that lifestyle of, getting married, having the house with the white picket fence and having the children. And they were beautiful. They actually looked like a Hollywood couple. My dad worked as a manager at a grocery store, high end, and my mom was a hairdresser at this wonderful, wonderful place called Cinderella's. So that was like a high end boutique, and they just were thriving. But my mom was always struggling with that, high end anxiety and the highs and lows of depression. But they did get married and then they did have their children, my brother first and then me. So they were living like this beautiful little lifestyle. But my mom's mental illness started to seep into that. And as that happened, our home became really unsettling and disturbing at times. My mother really rode that roller coaster of mental illness. And back in the 70s, it wasn't talked about. It was silent. Again, more silence. So it was frowned upon. So nobody addressed it. So my brother and I were with my mom and we saw many disturbing things. And my brother he was my protector. He was my everything. He shielded me from a lot of things when I was little. And when he got sick and I lost him, I was devastated. I lost my best friend. I lost the one person that truly was protecting me because he saw what I saw. We lived it together. And my dad always said the day that we lost my brother is the day that we lost my mom as well. And that is so true because our whole family fell apart when my brother died. And boy, what a road we went down after that. My dad engrossed himself in work and activities outside of the home. He did not want to be there. He couldn't handle being there without my brother and my mother being so sick. My mom just was such a mess. I mean, again, we went from the highs and the lows, not taking her medications, really manic and doing some really bizarre and outrageous things. So our home was very, very dysfunctional and disturbing and scary. So for a young girl like me, I was 6 years old when I lost my brother. And as time went on and the abuse started, it started with the verbal stuff, the emotional things that she would say, but then it turned physical. So I was enduring years of abuse. So by the time I was 10 years old, I had already had years of abuse under my belt. And I was so traumatized in so many ways. And nobody ever asked the questions. Nobody ever stepped up and said, Lisa, are you okay? People saw things, but nobody ever stepped up or stepped in. My dad, he was running, and I was there alone. And I can tell you some of the things that happened in my home were so frightening. I remember one night my mom steps into my room and she's looking at me with her eyes dark as can be, and she had a scissors in her hand and she's standing over my bed holding the scissors. And I'm saying, Mom, what are you doing? What are you doing? I had to be about 8 or 9 at the time. And she never answered me. She never did anything, but she just stood there and stared. How bizarre and creepy and terrifying is that? And then she turned around and walked out. So there were many episodes like that would happen, and they would just leave me so scarred and scared to sleep at night, scared of my own shadow, waiting for the next shoe to drop, what was going to happen next. And my mother would go from the highs and the lows. So when she was manic and out of control, she would talk really, really fast, and she's smoking her cigarettes and she's saying these outlandish things. And she would also bring up sexual things. And I was young at the time. So she's telling me sexual things that I truly didn't understand. But I knew enough that what she was talking about was not something I should be hearing. So again, my household was always bizarre and crazy. And as time went on, it got worse. And then that's when the physical abuse came into play. And my mother would get very aggressive, and she would hit me with all sorts of things and throw things at me. And on one occasion, she actually beat me up with a meat tenderizer. I do write about this in my book. All of this is in my story because, again, so complex, it needs to be talked about. People need to understand really what happens behind closed doors. I, called my house the house of horrors because that's how I felt. I would walk up those steps to come into my house, and my stomach would turn, and I would instantly get sick and feel like, oh my goodness, what's going to happen to me today? And that is how I lived my life every single day.
I know reading the book, the beatings you wrote, it seemed like every other page you were getting a beating.
I was,
Um, and
the verbal
she's
abuse
she's
and the
beating
physical.
you down the hallway, and she's threatening your life constantly,
Yes,
telling you, "If you do this or if you do that, I'm gonna kill you."
yes,
And, it's just, like, the craziness, and then when she was high, you talk about how she would dance and urinate and dance in it right there on the floor,
dancing
and
around urine, singing and screaming. I mean, like I
yeah.
said, everything was so bizarre all the time. And honestly, when I read back some of my stuff, it does still take my breath away because I'm like, oh my God, like this was my reality.
Not
And
just not just is it amazing you didn't kill yourself, not that I approve of that, but I mean, just the trauma, but that she didn't kill you with
oh, no,
as nuts as she was and the things she did. So then the other thing she would do is since your brother had passed away, she seemed to be very attracted to young boys, maybe on some level to replace the son, but on another level, she had a weird, I don't know if fetish would be the right word, but so she brought in, just to kind of move to the other type of abuse that you had going on at the same time. So she
yes,
moved in a young man who was trouble. Everyone knew he was trouble.
right,
Jerry, I don't you probably didn't use the real name, I assume, but
we're
no,
not.
yeah. So then you write about the so he pretty much just took over the home as well. This How old was he? How much older was he than you? I assume
He
he's
was
older.
15 and I was 12 going on 13. So again, a
Mhm.
quick backstory with him. He was in our
Yeah.
neighborhood as a young boy. He actually pulled a knife out on my brother outside playing, and my
Mm.
dad chased him out of the neighborhood. And then he moved away, but then he came back. And of course, he shows up on our doorstep. And my mom did have this, as you call the fetish, and this obsession with young boys, because again, she wanted to replace that void of my brother. But also, when you talk about the fine line of sexuality, when she was
Mhm.
manic, all of those sexual emotions and feelings are heightened to such levels. And with my mother, it was extreme.
So
So
that
yeah,
comes with the manic. It can come with
some
manic.
with mental illness, there is a
Mm.
piece, and if you read, about, mental illness and the different aspects of it, there is this piece in there. And then when you're in that mania, you are over sexualized. And my mother would go from this religious woman who's crying and praying to God to this vixen who is just like boom,
Yeah.
putting on a tube top and running around and really, putting her sexuality out there. And younger men and younger boys did feed that. So of course she had that, she would bring many strangers into our home. And when you do such a
Mm.
thing, she would bring people in off the streets. I became the prey. I became the
Mm.
prey. And before Jerry showed up, I was preyed upon by other people.
Mm.
God, I was not touched by other people, but I was preyed upon
Mm.
in my own home. So never any
So
safety.
you had no place of safety, which is just be enough to drive, I think, anyone crazy. So
Yes,
again, my
yes,
my awe of you for how incredible that you are and what you've been able to overcome. So just, we don't have to go into the depths of it. And of course, it's in your book for people to read. But just to summarize, Jerry abused you sexually and physically in every way.
yes,
Extreme. It's very hard to read, but it's important. I think it's good you that you wrote it for people to really appreciate what you went through, and also for anybody who's going through it, I think it's important for them to be able to read it and say, "Oh, I'm not the only one that's got this horrible." Not that you should feel ashamed, and nor should they feel ashamed, but it's a shame inducing experience, and the fact that you write about it like you do allows people, I think, to find and to see who you are and what you're doing. I think that's going to pull them out of that shame trap that gets put on you, forced on you. And then the other thing I want to just point out, and then I'll let you talk a little bit about it, and we'll move to the next question, is I noticed that even at times when you were finally able to get away from him, you would at times go back to him, and you'd ask yourself, why am I doing this? I'm going to get a beating. And that kind of is something that we can probably talk about one of these future episodes that we plan to do, where we touch on a lot of lessons.
Yes.
The trauma bonding. I think we should talk about trauma bonding in a later show, because that's really what he did to you. He was horrible to you, nearly killed you on so many occasions, because his beatings were just awful.
They
So
were horrendous. Horrendous. I use that word quite often, horrendous, because
yeah,
when you talk about the sexual abuse, that type of a relationship, I was a young girl. I did not want a boyfriend. I did not want to be in a relationship, especially with someone like him. And my mother, as I write in my book, my mother promoted it, and she even forced me into having a boyfriend when I did not want a boyfriend. I made it very clear. And of
mhm.
course, the response was either you are going to be my girlfriend or I'm just going to kill you. So there's a theme right there. So I
So
was
you
already
got a theme. Yeah, everybody wants to kill you and rape you and abuse you. And it seemed
this
like,
young girl, like from my mom already, and the family situation and those abandonment feelings of my dad and my family not helping and stepping in. Now I have this young man who is a very sick, twisted young man telling me he's going to kill me. So my self-esteem, let's just say it straight up, was in the toilet. Like, that's a good way of putting it,
yeah,
because I was already beaten down. And by the time he came along, I was riding that fine line of, do I want to live or do I want to die? Because the abuse was so horrific. And then he took it to a whole nother level of abuse.
yeah,
He wasn't, it just wasn't about the sexual abuse for him. It was about the torture and control. So he was even sadistic in his
yeah,
torture and abuse. He was, again, a very sick young man who was also mentally ill, like my mother. So they had this bonding of that mania together, and they fed off of each other, so much. And I was the innocent victim, just being tossed around like a rag doll, not knowing which end is up. And it was my daily life of horror. And
yeah.
he was so mean and disgusting in the things that he would do, that I did hit that point and I said, enough is enough. I just want to leave this earth. I want to go be with my brother, because my brother was the only one who ever kept me safe. And I always went back to that. I would always think of my brother. And I do
Mhm.
have to say, that's another reason I fought so hard, is because I
Mhm.
always felt my brother with me. And I felt
Mhm.
he was my guardian angel, and he kept pushing me. I always felt him pushing me to keep going, to keep going. But I did have that lapse where I just wanted to end it all.
Yeah.
And
And
we could
I
talk
I
about
wanna yeah, I
another.
wanna touch on that in probably the next episode that we do.
That's a
Um,
very powerful moment in my life. And
yeah,
yes, so thank God I'm here today. I
yeah.
am grateful that I did not follow through, because I know I'm here for purpose. I'm here for so many reasons, and I do have many blessings in my life now. And I went through what I went through, but sometimes I feel like, did it happen for a reason so I can help other people? And
Well,
that's
that
all.
is the perfect segue into my next question.
I'll let you go with it. Go ahead.
All right. So the next question I wanna ask you is, what do you hope people take from reading your book? So you said, "I know this happened for a reason," so let's talk about what you hope the book will accomplish.
I always hope that when someone reads my story, that they realize that they're not alone in their struggles, that they realize that they do have a voice, and they deserve to heal. They deserve to be able to go on that healing journey like I have, and find themselves and move forward with their lives to find happiness. That's always been my goal from day one. From writing this book, in the back of my mind, I always thought, I need to help people. I need to help people realize that they are worthy, they deserve better, and they could get there. And it is hard work. It's painful work, but it's work that is just so worth saving yourself. And I do call myself a voice for the voiceless because there's so many people out there that still sit with it. They sit in silence with it, and it eats away at them day after day. And eventually, everyone does hit their boiling point. And my hope for my story is that I will touch somebody enough that they will break their own silence and go on their healing journey.
So can you share I know I shared a little bit at the beginning about you and some of the awards that you've received and the position that you have. Can you just touch a little bit about how you're going out and how you're using your book to support the work that you're doing?
Yes, when I wrote The Unspoken Truth, I was not a public speaker. I'm going to be very honest. I was not a public speaker.
When was that published? I didn't put that in. I'm sorry. How long has it been out?
It's been out 2016, so 8 years,
8
and
years. Okay.
it travels the world. I have to tell you, it's been
Mhm.
traveling the world, and I always say that we are connected by circumstance. Across the miles, we are all connected by these circumstances of abuse. But yes, when I put my book out there, and I went to my first author talk, and the room was filled, and I'm like, oh, this just became real. Now
I
I
don't
have
you shared a picture. Is this it or is this another time?
This was another time. This was
Okay.
actually CHD, a conference where I was presenting about my story and about healing and mental health. So that was a wonderful, wonderful day. I had over 100 people come to listen to me speak. So I was really proud of that.
I'd like to take just a moment and read an excerpt from your book that really impressed me, and I think it fits really well into what we're talking about right now. Um, it says, "The strange thing is that one goes through life after such a horrible experience, it never goes away. It is a part of you forever, and one has to learn to own it, put it in its place, and make good out of a bad situation. The lessons would be learned later on in life with much time and work." Excuse me, I'm dealing with a cold. Writing this book is part of owning who I am and being proud of surviving all this tragedy. A wise man recently told me that I was a thriver. I looked at him funny for a moment, but I agree. What a wonderful word to use. It puts a new meaning to things on a whole new level. So here you
Wow.
are speaking to 100 people and going out and getting these awards and representing. You are definitely a thriver.
Thank you. And when you read back those words, it's just so powerful. It's powerful, those emotions that are connected with that. And
Mhm.
the gentleman who said that I was a thriver was actually my therapist. He
Mm.
was wonderful in regards to allowing me to unpack everything and put it in its place and move forward to write my book. So he was a big part of that. And when I talk about owning it, owning it all, and I always say taming the beast because my past and my trauma was a beast.
Mm.
And boy, did I battle really, really hard to fight it and overcome it. But yes, claiming it, owning it, validating the fact that these awful things did happen to me, but it does not define me or who I am today. And I recently just wrote a blog about trauma and how it affects you. The body absorbs it all, and the body keeps score. But I did talk a lot about is as you release it, and it becomes lighter, and you hear the words that you say. I was abused, and
Here's
awful things happened, but now I'm on the other side looking back, and it's
yeah,
just a wonderful feeling to be able to be on that side of the fence.
yeah. It's amazing that you're there. Um, I think if you can do it, anyone can do it, and that's what people need to know. And
And you're
that's
right.
why, yeah,
And I do say that I'm always talking about those things. It's like, I did it. It was really hard, but if I did it, you can do it. I never gave up. Maybe for a brief moment I gave up, but then I pushed forward. And healing came in so many stages and so many levels. It takes time, it takes work, it takes years, but you can get there and you can achieve it. And once you do, you feel so much lighter and so much freer. I mean, I have my dents and I have my quirks. I'll always have those things. That's part of my past. It's part of who I am. I own each and every one of those dents.
yeah. You gave people some beatings as well.
I wasn't, yeah,
You had.
make your own internal pain and you lash out. So again,
Yeah.
the routine, I lashed out everywhere.
People who provoked you, I'm gonna put that. You didn't go looking for it, but,
No, but people provoke me,
yeah.
but I was also easily provoked because I was so vulnerable and so angry, and it does seep out. It seeps out in all these different places. But as I've worked through those things now, and I've looked back at it all makes sense. It all fits in place to where it happened, how it happened, why I reacted the way I did. And that's another thing going through therapy. I learned a lot about why I reacted the way I did because of what I was holding in. And again, once I validated, said those words out loud, released it, changed everything for me. I mean, it wasn't
Mhm.
overnight, but it did change everything for me. And again, like you say, speaking to 100 people, I spoke to, many times I've done that. And every time I speak to people, I always can feel the audience and feel them connecting and drawing into what I'm saying to them because I am authentic and I am real in what I talk about. I don't hold back. As you know in my book, I don't hold back. When I
Yeah.
speak publicly, I don't hold back because I feel this is the only way that we could really reach people and help them and let them understand the reality of all these things that do go on in the everyday life.
Well, and that leads me to wanna just stop a moment and say to everyone that, to use that phrase, unpack.
Yes.
I want to unpack a lot of things with you. I want people to learn from you. And so we're going to do a lot more interviews with you where you're able to bring the lessons that you've learned and talk about these different moments and just help people to not just know your story but know how you got from there to here. And so I just encourage everybody who's watching this to please subscribe to the channel, especially if you've enjoyed this show. If you have, please give it a like and share it with someone who may need to hear what we're talking about. I suspect everybody knows someone who needs to hear about this. But if you'll subscribe and you can hit the little alert button, the bell, then you'll know when we've uploaded a new show because we've got a lot more to talk about.
We do.
Um,
We pack a ton.
yeah. So I want to move now to another one of my questions that I ask everyone is just take a moment, if you will, and share with us how you came to decide on your title and the cover of your book.
Yes, the title and the cover really says so much. And I did put a
Mhm.
lot of time and thought into it. And I was really excited that I was able to be a part of creating it. So that was a wonderful thing because, again, it was another extension of my healing. So when you look at that book, the first thing that you see is that little girl with the teardrop in her eyes, and she's basically saying, "Silence, be quiet." And that was me. I lived in silence. I was always told, you walk out the door, you put your game face on, you never speak of anything that ever happened in our household. And then when you reach behind that picture of this little girl, you see that scary house. As I called my home, the house of horrors. That's how I truly felt about my house. It was scary, it was dark, it was unpredictable. And this cover captures that. And the unspoken truth, that was my life. Everything was unspoken, everything that happened to me along the way, which I do explain a lot in my book about how I would be faced with these awful situations and it was never spoken about. It was never talked about. It was never addressed. So my life was very much unspoken. So the only title I could come up with that ever made sense to me right from the beginning was The Unspoken Truth. If the walls could speak, what a tale they would tell. And my book is the tell. It's the tell all of what happened inside that horrendous home.
Thank,
It,
thank you for sharing that. Yeah,
it's
it's a
powerful.
provocative cover. It looks like a haunted house. You definitely found the right house to drop back there. And the little girl looks like you with, just
Many people have
really,
asked me that. Is
is
that you?
that you? Yeah.
And they've even asked me, is that your granddaughter? Because my granddaughter, who is 15 now, looks very much like me.
Mhm.
So I had a lot of people say, is that your granddaughter? I'm like, no, believe it or not, we found a model that looked so much like me. And as a child, I did look very much like that. So it all came together beautifully. I was proud to be a part of it and to put my, my input in, and they were willing to listen to me. And boy, did it come together the way I absolutely expected it should have. And it does. The cover speaks to you. It speaks in its own volume without even turning a page.
Yeah, it does. It's provocative from the outside to the inside. So, I have one more question for you, and that is, we have people who watch the show that are interested in healing, by writing and sharing their stories the way that you have. So, what advice do you have for other aspiring authors who have a story of some kind of trauma or tragedy to share?
I say write, write, write. I tell inspiring authors all the time, and people who are going on their healing journey, start out by journaling. And I always say, start at the beginning. Start at the beginning of your life, your earliest memories. And right there, as you do that and move forward, you're going to find that pivotal moment in your life when things changed and things, became the struggles. And then you move forward and just keep writing, and write down blurbs, write down thoughts, feelings. It doesn't have to make sense to anybody. It just has to make sense to you because it is your life and your story. So inspiring writers, write, 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 journal, 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 and also read. Read other people's stories. I do a lot of that. I committed myself to reading other survivors' stories. I like real stories. I like to hear about real life things that happen, the good, the bad, the ugly, all of it. So I really encourage new aspiring authors to read other people's work. It will help you create your own writing style, what you like, what you don't like. Learning new words. As we read, our vocabulary grows. And for myself as a writer, from back to my first book to my second book and all the things that I've done, my blogging, it all has changed as I've evolved with, writing and reading other people's work. So I encourage people to do that as well. And always remind yourself that you can do it. When I became an author and I worked towards getting there, I visualized myself already there. I was like, I am the author, and this is my story, and this is my life. And then I put in the work and I did it, and my dreams did come true. So I tell everybody, go for it.
That's fantastic advice. I think it's true. You just got to write, and you will discover. I One thing I always say, just to kind of add to that, is that once you start writing about these things, it gives you the ability to step out of yourself, out of your life, and take on the perspective of a researcher. And it's a very healthy place to go, because you can see things about your life, and you can give yourself a lot of mercy and yourself a lot of grace when you can step out of the situation as a writer. And so just the process itself, and then of course the sharing of your story being the next step in healing. A
It's
lot
the
of times we do the writing, but we don't get to the sharing part. So
it's a brave and courageous move to step
mhm.
forward, say the words out loud, and then put it out there for the world to see. When I put my story out there, I was terrified. I did not know how I would be received by the world, because my life, my past, there was so much shame and hidden, hidden agendas and hidden stories and hidden, everything was hidden. So now here I am flipping the switch and putting it out there and being bold and brave. And boy, what an impact it has had on people all over the world. People connect with me constantly. And I'll always tell people, write to me, because I answer every single person that writes to me. I do. It might take
Wow.
a little time, but I'm very honest in that because I feel it's important. Because if someone's going to write to me and not get a response, that's not validating their thoughts and feelings. And that's not right, because that is not how I work. That's not what I promote myself to be. So I
Well,
have
I
to.
hope you can keep that up. But give yourself some grace if you can't, because I have a feeling you're going to become very well known, and that might become a little harder. Although you can always just send a quick message back. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. Like I said, we're going to be having a lot more to come with you. We'll
Yes, I'm
be
excited.
talking about so many things, and so I just encourage everybody who's been watching to watch for more episodes with Lisa. And until then, we will all be living our best triumph lives.
Yes. And I always like to send out there, as you're going through your days, embrace the journey. That is my go-to motto.
You definitely walk the talk. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate being here.
You